All right, we're back again. Ashley Keller Williams Real Estate. We're talking about the book Backdoor Revolution. Okay, so now we're going into part 2 of the book. Okay, and in part 2, he's talking about it from more of like a professional's perspective. Okay, so chapter 7 is what is distinctive about developing and inducing ADUs. Okay, now he goes in and he says like ADUs are a rare form of housing, yada yada. Okay, well, of course they are. It's new. All right, and I would say that this idea of I think this idea of like this type of infill housing where you're like, okay, I'm going to build a smaller unit, like say in my backyard or whatever, it's like a relatively new idea. Okay. I would say that, in kind of like reviewing the next few chapters here, to me, I think that the issue is complex, right? Like, he's going to talk about like, hey, why are sometimes is it difficult to develop an ADU? And I think it's complex, right? Like you have a lot of stakeholders, right? You have your neighbors, you have the government, you have, local government, you have national government, right? Like there's all these different people that are weighing in on your ADU. Now, I wouldn't worry about that so much, right? If you can kind of hold in your mind that in a way you live in a city and in a way the city is a huge freaking HOA, okay? Like if you can hold that in your mind, like the whole city is a gigantic HOA because we all pay property taxes and that pot of money goes to certain things. Like if you can hold that in your mind, I think you'll be able to like hold the perspective about why it's such a complex issue and why everybody's weighing in, right? Because obviously, there's going to be some things that happen, in further chapters in this book that I'm going to talk about. And if you can hold that perspective, I think you'll be able to get it. Okay. So, he says it's a rare form of housing and they're unlikely to flourish under current regulatory framework in most cities. Okay? Now, here's the thing. In my city, I think that they have the possibility to flourish. I think that the city of Everett has done a bunch of different things to make ADU development easier. Okay? Now, here's the thing that I think is maybe really the issue. Housing and he talked about it early on, and and I hit on it, but I didn't hit on it, I don't think, hard enough. Okay, ground up construction is a professional field. Okay, like there are people, they go get degrees, they have licenses, and they have experience building houses from the ground up. Okay, it's not like, hey, we could just do this on the weekend with Uncle Bob. All right? No. Like building a house with all of the rules and regulations by the city and all that stuff is not like a weekend deal. Okay? So, I think kind of keeping that in mind, it's challenging, especially because he goes in here to say, he said that in Oregon, they did a survey and they found that 70 to 90% of the ADU developers were homeowners. Now, I guarantee you that all those homeowners were not themselves developers as their full-time profession. Many of them might have been, who knows, they could have been computer programmers or accountants or doctors or lawyers. Now, I'm not saying that a doctor or lawyer can't figure out how to build a house, okay? But that's not their job. Right? So, you got to kind of keep in mind that, the development field itself has its own language. They have their own set of rules. They've got nomenclature. They've got symbols. They've got words. They've got ways of doing things. And their field is constantly evolving, right? There are more and new safety standards. There are, hey, we have this new standard, that standard on that, blah, 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 blah. Like all of these are specialty fields, right? Your electrician is a specialist, You have to remember that, you think about your own field, right? Like there are people that are specialists, right? There are people that are generalists and so on, right? So you have to remember that it's a lot like that. Like building a home is not easy. Okay. So I will just say that. And so, I think, like, I know that he's saying it's difficult I think it's only difficult because you don't have developers developing them. If you had a developer or a builder come and do it, they're going to just knock them out. right? Like if they were profitable for them, and I have seen developments that include them, they don't have any problem. They could be like, hey, we're going to build 200 houses, all with ADUs. And then they have no problem. Because they have everybody on staff. They've got their architect, they've got their engineer. They just go in there, boom, 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 draw it up, done and done. Okay. But if you're just like, hey man, my house is from 1930 and, you're talking to your partner or whatever, and you're like, hey, we should build an ADU. I mean, it's not as simple for you, right? You got to find all these people, right? Okay. So then he goes on and he talks about like how, asynchronous, development, I think this is obvious. It means that the primary resident is developed at a different time period from the ADU. Super common. I mean, I think, I don't even know if you could say ADU and synchronicity. It's there are some that are like that, but, generally speaking, they don't all come together in one. Okay. And so, with that being said, a lot of times what happens is there are, rules and codes where, the city wants the architecture to match the primary. And you have to remember, like, you could live in a historic district or an area where they're like, okay, you have to follow your new development needs to be like, reasonably similar to the time period of the house that's already on there, the primary, right? And so, that's an extra consideration, right? It's an extra consideration, an extra thing that you have to talk to when you're developing them. I think that this is my opinion, I feel like the thing that has actually restricted ADU growth the most is this next thing, when he says building an ADU is likely the single largest cash investment a homeowner will ever make. Okay. I think that period, he goes and possibly one of the most complex projects. Okay. Yeah, it is a complex project, but I think that the cash investment is the big deal, right? Because, there are mechanisms right now to, when he wrote this book, maybe there weren't as many, but there are more mechanisms now to get financing for an ADU. Right? There are mechanisms now to get financing for an ADU, which we didn't have before. But you have to remember, like, you can go buy a $500,000 house with $25,000 cash outlay, right? To build an ADU, you want to build a unit. If the cost of that ADU, he quotes in here 160,000. I don't know that's possible. Maybe more like 250. You got to come up with 250. And how do you do that? Right? If it's your primary residence, you may now, you may have enough equity in your property to do that, right? So that's an important thing to remember. You may have enough equity in your property not to have to bring a bunch of cash. But, it's really difficult to say, right? You'd have to sort of figure out like, okay, what am I going to make? Have to have the plans. And then you'd have to go back and find the comparable sales, because if you're going to go work with a bank, they're going to, when they use a construction loan, they're going to try to figure out like, okay, when you take this thing and you develop it, now what is everything worth, right? They're still going to be working from the appraisal perspective. Like, what is going to be the value of this once it's done? Okay, to figure out if they can lend it to you. Now, if for some reason your design is more expensive than what it would be after it's completed, then you'd have to bring extra cash. Okay. But I think that's been the biggest issue here. Like I think for as much promotion and as much excitement as there is about ADUs, I think that the single biggest barrier is, now somebody, they're already qualifying, maybe at the limits of their qualifying for a property. Then they want to add an ADU, and adding the ADU to their finances, to their debt mix, is just not possible. It's not feasible unless you have enough money to do it. Okay. So I think that's the biggest challenge, but hey, you know what? I mean, I may be completely wrong. Maybe there's more than one way to skin a cat. I mean, people could go, like he mentioned, maybe you could borrow money from a family member or whatever and make it happen. Okay. So he goes into that. He talks a lot about the challenges around that and getting access to capital, He says basically like people that are super wealthy might not even actually develop an ADU because, they don't have any like motivation to have it, right? Like a lot of times people are wanting to do an ADU, do a long-term rental to get some cash flow, right? I think another thing that has come up is like, people that have lived in their home for a really long time, they want to stay in their neighborhood. One possibility is to go ahead and build an ADU, right? Because then you could get some passive income. So, I think it's a little bit more let's see, fit for purpose, right? Like, you need to figure out like what would be your reason for having the ADU and see if it makes any sense, right? What would be your reason for having the ADU? So I think going through and doing that, and oh my gosh, I don't even know if he really talks about this, but there's all these development fees with the city. There's the cost of doing the plans up front, right? So you need, when you're kind of planning and thinking about doing these, you need to have, probably like 50 grand or so set aside just to do the initial plans. Right. And that is not included in the mortgage. Like if you're going to try to get mortgage financing, I mean, one way you could do it. Here's how you do it. You get a HELOC. Okay. On your primary. You do your plans using HELOC funds. Then you get your plans finished. Then you go to the bank and then you do a construction loan. Because what the construction loan is going to do is it's going to take all of those mortgages and all that stuff, and it's going to rewrap the whole entire thing into a whole new mortgage. So boom, you're all set there. Okay. He does hit on this. He does say, probably what will happen is because you have a lot of amateur developers is what he calls it, homeowner developers, what you'll probably see is a lot of like small businesses pop up that are working, to consult and help people develop their ADUs. Right? Because you need somebody that can actually like, help you navigate the space, that understands, hey, this is what's going on. These are the pitfalls, to make it faster and to make sure you don't make a lot of costly mistakes along the way, right? Like that's it, right? You need a guide. Okay. So I think what you will see, as we get more and more of that here in our areas is, maybe you'll see that business pop up where, the people are just really focused on, that's all their business does. Is connect people that want to build an ADU on their property with all the specialists and, and help you design and create an ADU quickly. You're not like waiting like 3 years to get it done. Okay. So, he talks a little bit about, flexible living arrangements. I mean, I think we've kind of already covered that. And, he talks about like sometimes, municipalities, providing like certain exemptions and all that stuff for ADUs. So that may come and, you'll have to check specifically with your area, right? Like, maybe they're doing it in your area. They might be not doing it in other people's areas. So you need to check, see if they're doing those deals. Okay. Well, that was chapter 7. Boom, in the books. If you are enjoying this series, please like the video. Check out the other videos, right? Because this is video 7. All right. Please like the video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you on the next one.